You ever have one of those mornings where you just know it's gonna go sideways? Mine started with a tractor and ended with the HOA president screaming in my face like I'd just run over her poodle. Name's Victor Braddock. I'm a custom furniture maker, mostly work with reclaimed wood. I bought this place on the edge of the Hawthorne Ridge subdivision a year ago. It's got a workshop in back, a long gravel driveway, and about 3 acres of open land. Perfect for my business. I keep a small tractor for hauling lumber and clearing brush. Nothing fancy, but it's loud. Apparently, that was enough to summon the beast of the cul-de-sac, HOA President Teresa Gilmore. At exactly 8:02 this morning, just as I was backing the tractor out the side barn, she came storming up my driveway in a matching sweatsuit and rage in her eyes. "Excuse me," she shouted, flapping a clipboard like it was an arrest warrant. "What do you think you're doing?" I cut the engine and turned around. "Mornin', I'm moving some reclaimed beams out back. Why?" "You can't run industrial equipment in a residential zone," she snapped. "This is a neighborhood, not a construction site." I scratched my beard. "Teresa, this is my property. I'm not breaking any laws. I'm on my land." "You're inside HOA jurisdiction," she barked, jabbing her finger toward my gravel lot. "We've had complaints, noise violations." "I'm writing you up." "From who?" I asked. "The squirrels?" That didn't help. Her whole face turned red like a microwave tomato. "We'll see how funny you are when you're fined $500 a day for non-compliance." I climbed off the tractor and walked over. "You sure about that?" She held her ground. "Absolutely. This is HOA land. You signed the papers when you moved in." That's when I realized something was way off. See, before buying the property, I did my homework, dug through zoning maps, title deeds, county records. My place wasn't part of the HOA, it was adjacent to it. I remembered because I made a point of avoiding neighborhoods with these types of people. "I don't think you understand where your authority ends," I said calmly. She leaned in, eyes wild. "I'm the president of this homeowners association." "I make the rules," I smiled. "You might want to double-check the boundary line." That shut her up for a second, but she wasn't done. "If you're going to be difficult, we'll handle this legally. You'll be hearing from our lawyer." She turned and stomped off, heels crunching in the gravel. I waited until she was gone. Then I went into my office, pulled out the thick folder from when I bought the place, and started flipping through. Within 5 minutes, I found exactly what I needed. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my land. In fact, the opposite was true. A small triangle of land about a 1/4 acre was part of my property. Included in that triangle, their beloved community garden and half the trail they'd recently paved with HOA funds. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Teresa had just threatened to fine me for noise violation. On land I technically owned, and she had no idea. Yet. The next morning, the mail brought a thick envelope with a return address from Hawthorne Ridge Residential Compliance Committee. Inside was a formal violation notice printed on cream-colored paper, complete with a list of supposed infractions: noise disturbance, operating commercial machinery, and unauthorized land use. They even threw in a threat to place a lien on my property. I whistled low. A lien? Bold move for someone who didn't even own the dirt under her community herb patch. I drove straight to the county recorder's office after lunch. Karen, the clerk behind the desk, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who wore cat-eye glasses and had a memory like a steel trap. I told her I needed to pull parcel maps and deed history for 2 adjoining properties, mine and the HOA's common area. She raised an eyebrow. "You trying to prove a fence war?" "Something like that," I said. 15 minutes and a few database clicks later, she laid out a map from the county GIS system and pointed to 2 shaded zones. "See that jog in the border?" she said, tapping the screen. "Your property extends east an extra 75 feet. That's not HOA land, it's attached to your parcel from a 1991 adjustment. Looks like the developer's original plan had your lot as a buffer zone. HOA never bought it. So they built on land they don't own. Looks that way. And they've been collecting dues to maintain it. That's a problem," she said, narrowing her eyes. You want copies? Every page you've got. I left with a folder thick enough to anchor a sailboat. Back home, I set up a meeting with a real estate attorney in town, Mira Dalton. She worked out of a modest office above a bakery and had a reputation for knocking down crooked zoning boards like bowling pins. I laid out the deed records and maps on her desk. She studied them carefully, then leaned back and exhaled through her nose. They're using your land for a community space and collecting HOA fees on it. That's fraudulent use of property, she said. You have a few choices. You could force them to vacate, sue for back rent, or if you want to get creative, file a cease and desist and revoke their access. I grinned. What if I just want them to stop threatening me? She tapped a pencil against her notepad. Then you respond with facts, not feelings. We send them a certified notice demanding they cease all contact regarding violations and remove any structures or signage from your land. Then we let them make the next move. By the weekend, the letter was drafted, notarized, and sent. I didn't need to wait long. Sunday afternoon, I was organizing some walnut planks behind the barn when I heard tires crunching up the driveway. Teresa's Lexus came to a stop just shy of my work trailer. She stepped out with two men, one tall and wiry, the other short and red-faced, both wearing polo shirts tucked into khakis like they were headed to a golf tournament for middle management. "Victor," she said, her voice tight. "You went too far." I wiped sawdust from my hands. "You're trespassing. This is an official site visit. These are board members of the HOA," the taller one spoke up. "We received your attorney's letter. We think there's been a misunderstanding." "That's so?" I asked, motioning toward the garden area visible beyond the tree line. "Because it looks like your misunderstanding involves paving a walking trail on land you don't own." The short man stepped forward. "That's common property. It's been maintained by the HOA for years." I pulled out my phone and opened the county's parcel viewer app. I zoomed in on the shaded property lines and held it up. "This lighter area, that's mine. Your trail, your benches, even that little pergola with the wind chimes, it's all on my land. I suggest you do a full survey before you continue claiming it." Teresa's nostrils flared. "We had no way of knowing. The developer told us." "Doesn't matter what the developer told you," I interrupted. "You never purchased the land. You've been using it without permission, collecting dues on it, and now you're threatening me with liens." The taller man shifted uncomfortably. "We'll need time to consult legal counsel." "You do that," I said. "But starting today, you're restricted from accessing anything past that tree line. Any further encroachment will be treated as trespassing." Teresa's face twisted. "You're being unreasonable." I looked her dead in the eyes. "You tried to fine me for running a tractor on my own land, then you threatened to place a lien." "I'd say I've been more than reasonable." They left without another word. The next morning, I walked down to the corner of my property and hammered in 4 red boundary stakes. I added a few signs that read, "Private property, no HOA access, violators will be prosecuted." Nothing aggressive, just clear language. That afternoon, Mira called me. "You're going to love this," she said. I checked recent HOA filings with the county. They submitted financial disclosures last quarter that include maintenance expenses for that garden and trail system, over $11,000. All spent on land they don't own. Exactly. That's misappropriation of funds. If they collected dues for maintenance on land they claimed was common property, that's grounds for a class action. Especially if they used those dues to pay contractors. "Think it's worth alerting the homeowners?" "I think it's mandatory," she said. "And I know just the way to do it." That weekend, I printed out flyers, copies of the parcel maps, financial disclosures, and a short summary of what the HOA had done. Mira helped me write it in plain English. No legal jargon, just facts. I walked door to door, hand delivering them to every house in Hawthorne Ridge. Some folks were skeptical. Others were furious. By Tuesday, a group of homeowners had called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Word traveled fast. Teresa tried to deny everything, claim it was all a clerical error, but someone pulled out a printout of my flyer and demanded answers. By Wednesday, I got a knock at the door. It was Officer Landry from the county sheriff's office. Tall guy, easygoing. He'd come by a few times before when I reported illegal dumping near the backwoods. "Hey Vic," he said. "Mind if I ask you a few questions about the HOA situation?" "Sure thing," I said, motioning him inside my shop. He looked around the woodworking benches, admiring the half-finished oak table I was sanding. "We got a report from the county prosecutor. They're launching an investigation into fraudulent use of funds based on your attorney's documents. HOAs in hot water." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of hot?" "The kind that might involve criminal charges if they knowingly misused dues. At the very least, there's a civil suit coming. Might be a few resignations on the horizon." "Guess I won't be getting that Leon notice after all," he laughed. "Doesn't look like it." As he left, I stepped outside and looked toward the garden area. No one had set foot there since the signs went up. The wind rustled the leaves overhead, peaceful. Quiet, except for the faint sound of a wind chime still clinging to the pergola they'd built on my land. I let it ring. They'd hear it every time they passed. A soft reminder that their kingdom was built on borrowed dirt, and I just took it back. Thursday morning brought something new: silence. No shouting from the street. No clipboard-waving crusaders marching up my driveway. No passive-aggressive courtesy notices tucked under my mailbox flag. I brewed coffee, leaned against my front porch post, and watched as a few anxious-looking residents filtered toward the Hawthorne Ridge clubhouse across the road. Most walked alone, a few in clusters, speaking in hushed tones. One guy, mid-40s, wore a landscaping uniform, paused at the edge of my property, and gave a small nod before moving on. It wasn't just buyer's remorse that had set in. The entire neighborhood had stumbled into the realization that their HOA wasn't just overreaching, it was operating on land it didn't own and spending their dues to do it. And that realization had started to ripple outward in ways no one expected. By afternoon, the county's zoning department had issued a formal notice taped to the HOA's community bulletin board ordering a temporary closure of the garden and trail area pending a property use investigation. Someone had posted a photo of the notice to the neighborhood's online forum. That's when things really unraveled. Mira forwarded me a screenshot from the forum. Apparently, one of the HOA board members, a guy named Paul Henley, had resigned in the middle of the night. His resignation letter, which he posted publicly, included a short paragraph that basically admitted they'd known for some time that the land's ownership was in dispute, but had chosen to continue operations until formally challenged. In other words, they gambled no one would ever check. And that wasn't just unethical. It was criminal negligence. I called Mira. He admitted they knew. I said, "That can't be nothing." "It's not," she replied. "That admission makes the financial misuse deliberate. It opens the door to fraud charges. Will the county handle it? The county can refer it up, but I'd bet this ends up with the district attorney." By Friday, the story had made the local paper. A 2-column headline: HOA accused of using private land, misappropriating funds. There was a photo of the red boundary stakes I'd put up and a blurry shot of Teresa leaving what looked like a tense meeting at City Hall. I didn't hear from her again, at least not directly. But damage control was clearly underway. Saturday morning, a manila envelope was quietly left on my workshop door. No return address. Inside was a typed letter from the HOA's legal representative. It was polite, almost meek. They wanted to formally apologize for the confusion and requested a meeting to discuss possible easement rights and shared access agreements. I read it twice, then tossed it into the wood stove. Sunday, things escalated. I was hauling a slab of cherry to the planer when I looked out the window and saw county deputies standing on the trail near the pergola. They were measuring distances, photographing structures. One of them climbed onto the garden plot and began inspecting the irrigation system. I recognized the lead officer, Detective Cara Linwood, who handled property fraud cases for the county. She knocked on my front door about an hour later. "Morning, Mr. Braddock. Got a few questions if you've got time." "Of course," I said, inviting her in. She didn't waste time. "We've reviewed the deed records and surveyed the boundary lines. The HOA built multiple permanent structures on your land without permission, then collected dues under the pretense that it was common property. That's fraudulent representation and misuse of funds. Sounds about right. We also received a statement from Paul Henley confirming the board had prior knowledge of the error and chose to suppress it." I raised an eyebrow. "That enough for charges? It's enough to begin criminal proceedings." "We've issued a subpoena for HOA financial records and are coordinating with the district attorney's office. Depending on what we find, it could involve charges for wire fraud, mail fraud, and unlawful enrichment." I exhaled. "That's going to make the next board meeting interesting." Linwood gave a dry chuckle. "If there is one." Monday brought a new twist. The HOA's bank account was frozen via court order. A few residents learned about it after trying to make their monthly dues payments online and getting error messages. One of them, a nurse named Leela, came by that evening. "I just wanted to thank you," she said after I answered the door. "Most of us had no idea. We just paid our dues and assumed everything was above board." "Glad I could help," I said. "You doing all right with the uncertainty?" She nodded. "Better now. People are organizing. There's talk of forming a new committee to replace the existing board. One that doesn't pretend to own land it doesn't." She hesitated before adding, "Teresa hasn't been seen since Friday. Her car's still there, but no one's answered the door." That didn't surprise me. When a house of cards falls, the last thing its architect wants is to be found under the rubble. By Wednesday, the district attorney's office issued a press release confirming the investigation. They'd identified over $20,000 in misappropriated funds used for trail construction, gardening contracts, and signage, all billed as HOA maintenance expenses for land that never legally belonged to them. The press release also mentioned individuals currently under review for criminal liability. I didn't need names. I already knew who. That same afternoon, I got a call from a local surveyor who'd been retained by a group of residents. They wanted to formally establish the limits of the HOA's actual jurisdiction and redraw the community map. "We're going to completely revise the subdivision's legal boundaries," he explained. "There's talk of disbanding the entire HOA and rechartering under a voluntary civic association." "You'll get no argument from me," I said. "Can we use your parcel records as the baseline?" "Yours are the cleanest. Be my guest." Thursday evening, I was back in my workshop finishing a walnut bench when I noticed movement by the old trail. A small group of residents had gathered their Leela among them. They were taking down the pergola, no shouting, no ceremony. Just quiet, deliberate work. Someone loaded the wind chimes into a box. Another rolled up the trail sign and carried it off. A teenager with a crowbar pried up one of the benches and helped his dad load it into a truck bed. They didn't ask permission. They didn't need to. They were undoing the damage themselves. That night, I stood on my porch and looked out across the now empty garden space. It looked more like my land again. Wild grass. A few scrub trees. The way it was before someone decided to plant control and water it with deception. Mira called the next morning. "District Attorney's Office filed preliminary charges," she said. "1 count of wire fraud, 2 counts of misappropriation of funds, and 1 count of falsifying public records, all directed at Teresa Gilmore. She's actually being charged, officially. The board members who cooperated might avoid prosecution, but she's on the hook. They've already issued a summons. She'll be arraigned next week." I didn't say anything for a moment. "You all right?" Mira asked. "Yeah." "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how fast people fall when they think they're untouchable." She let that hang for a moment. "Come by the office next week. We'll finalize the easement language and make sure no one ever tries this again." I'll be there. As I hung up, I glanced toward the workshop. My tools were quiet now, no arguments about decibel levels, no threats taped to the door. Just the sound of a man working wood on land he owned, in peace hard-earned. And outside, the wind rolled through the trees where the wind chimes used to hang, leaving only the sound of leaves and justice settling in. The courthouse smelled like dust and old books. I sat in the back row, arms folded, watching the slow unraveling of everything Teresa had built with lies and overreach. She hadn't looked up once since the bailiff called the room to order. Her attorney, a pale man with an overworked briefcase, whispered something in her ear that made her jaw tighten. The arraignment was procedural, but the charges read aloud had weight. Deliberate misrepresentation of property lines, unauthorized collection of assessments, and fraudulent use of community funds. Not civil violations, criminal counts. The district attorney didn't flinch as he spoke them. After the judge set a court date and released her on bond, she exited through a side door, flanked by her attorney and a woman I vaguely recognized from the HOA board. Neither of them looked at the crowd of residents seated behind me. Over a dozen had shown up, some in business attire, others in weekend jeans and windbreakers. It wasn't just about the charges anymore, it was about the betrayal. They had trusted her, and she'd used that to build her own miniature empire. Outside, the air was brisk. A few homeowners lingered under the courthouse awning, murmuring in tense circles. I spotted Leela, the nurse I'd spoken to before, standing with a man in a flannel coat holding a rolled-up blueprint. "Victor," she called, waving me over. "This is Dennis. He's been digging through the HOA's old landscape permits." Dennis extended a hand. Turns out they submitted at least 3 applications with forged survey maps. The county's reviewing them now. "Forged?" I asked. "They redrew the boundaries to match their claim. Didn't even line up with the county's GIS system," he said. "They used the fake maps to justify their maintenance budget," Leela added, "and those budgets were approved at closed-door meetings. No transparency." Dennis tucked the blueprint under his arm. "We've got enough here to trigger a full audit." "Already in motion," I said. "Detective Linwood called me this morning. They're expanding the investigation to include the Architectural Review Committee. Apparently they rubber-stamped a bunch of projects without permits." Leela shook her head slowly. "It just keeps going." "Rot usually does," I replied. Back home, I found a manila envelope wedged under my shop door. Inside was a handwritten note, not from the HOA, but from someone named Elaine Brody. She introduced herself as a former treasurer of the HOA from 5 years prior. She'd left the board after clashing with Teresa over unexplained expense reports and had kept copies of financial memos she suspected were doctored. She wrote, "I stayed quiet for too long. If you're helping bring the truth out, I want in." I called Mira. She picked up on the first ring. "I've got new evidence. Former treasurer says she's got the original books. Get her to scan everything. We'll cross-check those against the digital filings submitted to the county. If there are discrepancies, we'll have proof of intentional fraud." Elaine met us at Mira's office the next afternoon. She arrived with a battered accordion folder filled with typed ledgers, handwritten notes, and signed memos. Mira laid them out on the conference table and began comparing them against the HOA's reported budgets. Within 20 minutes, she stopped flipping pages. "They inflated contractor invoices," she said. "Here, this landscaping company filed a job for $3,000. But Elaine's original record shows it at $1,700. They doubled the amount on the books." Elaine nodded. "Teresa insisted we use her cousin's company. I never saw a crew show up, but the checks cleared." Mira looked up. "This is embezzlement, plain and simple. With these originals, we have a timeline and motive. The title fraud was just the surface." Teresa was lining her pockets while hiding behind the HOA charter. By the end of the week, the district attorney added 2 more charges: financial falsification and personal gain through fiduciary misrepresentation. Teresa was rearrested and booked quietly. No news vans. No statements. Just a quiet takedown of a woman who had once dictated the color of mailboxes and the length of grass blades like she was running a sovereign nation. The fallout came fast. The entire board resigned in staggered waves. One by one, they submitted typed letters riddled with vague denials and veiled apologies. But the community had already moved on. A new group formed calling themselves the Hawthorne Ridge Civic Council. Their first motion: dissolve the HOA charter entirely. The vote passed, nearly unanimous. I was invited to the first open meeting as a guest. It was held in the same clubhouse Teresa once ruled from, now stripped of its banners and framed bylaws. The chairs were arranged in a circle. No podium. No hierarchy. Dennis stood, holding up a binder. We've filed to establish a voluntary civic association. No dues unless you opt in. No enforcement powers beyond code compliance outlined by the county. No more secret budgets. Leela added, "We're drafting a community maintenance plan. It'll be handled by residents who volunteer. No one can tell you what color to paint your shutters." Applause followed, not loud but genuine. Someone across the circle turned to me. "Victor, anything you'd like to say?" I stood slowly. "Just this: never trust anyone who's afraid of transparency. And never let a clipboard tell you who owns your land." There was laughter, light this time, not bitter, not nervous. After the meeting, I walked the old trail. The broken posts and garden markers were gone, just soft earth and a few sprigs of wild clover. My land again, not contested, not leased. Mine. That night, I drafted a letter to the county, formally offering a shared use agreement for the path. Non-exclusive, revocable, no money involved, just neighborly access under clear terms. They accepted it the next week. The land stayed mine. But the trail became everyone's again, this time honestly. Teresa pled guilty that spring. Took a deal to avoid jail, but paid restitution and was barred from serving on any homeowners association board in the state. Her house went up for sale not long after. Mira sent me a message when the final court filings came through. The last line read, "All disputed claims resolved, property boundaries affirmed." I pinned it to my shop wall next to a sketch of a walnut bench and a photo of the land the HOA once thought they owned. Now my tractor hums without interruption. My saws whir. My land is quiet when I want it to be and alive with work when I choose, and not a single wind chime dares hang where it doesn't belong.